Hi, my name is Tony Dahlager. I'm a managing director at Anaytlics8. Outside of talent costs, some of the largest costs we see for our clients is related to data analytics spend is their cloud spend. So with providers like AWS, Azure, or GCP. In 2020, many organizations quickly pivoted to making larger investments in public cloud architectures over what we would traditionally think of as like on-premise data centers instead. A lot of reasons for that, obviously, and a lot of benefits from that. But running analytics workloads in the cloud has resulted in what I would call misaligned expectations in terms of true costs. And oftentimes, clients are faced with the reality that things are maybe more expensive than they originally projected. There's two really important fundamentals that need to be in place when considering that and when managing your cloud budget related to specifically data analytics. The first is to have clear stewardship. The second is to continually right size your services. So for the first one, when I say assign stewards of the cloud budget, this might seem really obvious to some of you, but somebody needs to actually be responsible for the budget of the cloud and reviewing in detail the cloud provider bills on a regular basis. The fundamental thing that this activity does is make sure that there's not any unexpected, unexplainable, or unjustified spend that goes on for months and months. This person is different, probably different than the owner of the budget. They're likely not someone on your accounting team. This person needs to be able to know what each cloud service or application does at a high level, and they should know who to talk to when there's a question about the purpose and the usage of those services. So if there's no one looking at your bills, you're likely going to be very reactive to large variances of spend. So like questions we get asked sometimes, like, why did my bill triple, right? Well, maybe somebody forgot to stop a service when they were done with it. If that goes on for months, right, that's a lot more painful. Obviously, right, stewards then can work to create policies and alerts over time, iteratively, so that you can be more proactive about creating more granular budgets or identifying runaway spend before it's too late at month end even, right? Each public cloud provider has really good foundational coursework that teaches you the basics about what each service does and how to create policies and alerts to monitor and control that spend. So if no one on your team knows how to do that today, that's okay, right? There's simple courses that are available for you to be able to at least get to that level of understanding, right? The first step is that you have to have that stewardship be clear that someone is responsible for that activity of looking at the bills and having tough conversations. The second foundational item I want to talk about today is sometimes difficult, right? Because you have to kind of admit, like, we didn't get it right the first time, right? But the idea is you need to be consistently right-sizing the services themselves. And again, this is not an admission of failure. The great benefit of cloud services is that almost all of them are elastic, meaning that you can scale them up or scale them down depending on your need, right? You get more horsepower or storage or resources when you need them, and then release them back to the public cloud provider when you no longer need them and you no longer pay for those services, right? Right sizing your services, like I said, has to be an ongoing activity though, because that can be a big contributor driving your costs. So there's a bunch of types of questions you can ask. I'm going to focus on a few today that we think are most common and that potentially have the biggest impact when you think about it directly about right sizing. So the first thing is to shut down services when they're not in use, right? You have to ask the question to teams that use cloud services, could you limit them to run only during working days or working hours? If you leave services or servers running over a weekend in the cloud when they're not in use, that alone is a 29% reduction in cost savings alone, right? Shutting those services down or releasing them back to the public cloud provider outside of working hours, if you work from, let's say, 8 to 5 or something within a given time zone, that can be up to a 66% cost reduction. And no, that's low-hanging fruit, right? But it's good to ask teams and continually revisit the requirements that they have, because you might find like, hey, we can operate on 4 hours a day or just on these days to curb those costs. The second question you want to address, right, is whether or not services are running at capacity or not. And really have teams experimented with lower compute, storage, or memory requirements. Pretty simple, but if you don't need, as beefy of services, you can save money that way. Third point is, are you taking advantage of reserving instances or committing to long-term spend agreements with cloud providers? And the big thing here is once you have patterns of usage defined, Public cloud providers allow you to be able to make a commitment, a longer term commitment, to take advantage of cost savings. If all of your services are on an on-demand capacity, public cloud providers are going to charge you more for those services, right? So now that you have a baseline, you're reviewing your bills with stewardship each month and having those direct conversations, you can look at and project out farther out and say, I think we can commit to this amount and realize cost savings with your cloud providers with that. And lastly, the question that's the hardest one to address, but still important, right, is making sure you're keeping up and taking advantage of new enhancements to services. So if you built something in the cloud, even just a few years ago, there's a good chance that you benefit from reviewing basically if there are smarter, maybe more price performant, price optimized ways to solve your problems today. So the way you do that, right, is you identify areas where you can adopt more serverless technology and less containers or particular reserve server instances to try to have it be, again, more reflective of usage rather than something you have to maintain constantly. Because the big thing there is you want to look at it in terms of a total cost of ownership. How much time are people spending maintaining all these different services? And is there a way to push some of that back to your cloud provider to have your costs be more price performant from that? Follow Anaytlics8 to hear more tips like this and insights about the data analytics industry as a whole.